So we will just do the first half of this section 5.1 today. You will have a homework assignment tonight. When you come back, we'll finish 5.1. You'll have an additional homework assignment tomorrow. Tomorrow. The bad thing with the lesson on Friday is that we will have homework over the weekend. So Friday, just be prepared to come in Friday and get to work. We've just got to get a lot of material in before that Thanksgiving break. We just talked about when Thanksgiving is. We're not going to talk about it again. Okay, use the calendar. All right. Shh. So here is a quick review. So what is used to show that two lines are congruent? So if you're looking at the diagram, we use tick marks to show that two lines are congruent. Two line segments, of course. I'm not going to lie to you. So what if there are multiple line segments that are congruent in one figure?
Multiple tick marks.
That is actually correct. Yes. So if you could use one tick mark to show two lines are congruent, or for example, I'll just add them to this one. If you do like two tick marks on each, those are congruent. Okay. All right. The next one. What is used to show two angles are congruent?
Arcs.
Yes. So these little things, they look like little parts of a circle. Arc marks are used to show that angles are congruent, and just like with the tick marks, you can use multiple arc marks. So if two angles are congruent and you want to show that another two, you would just use maybe 2 arc marks on each angle or 3 arc marks on each angle, okay? As long as they're marked in the same way, same number of arc marks or same number of tick marks, those are the ones that are congruent, okay? Because we're going to be looking at congruent triangles, and when the triangles are congruent, all 3 sides match and all 3 angles match. So we're going to have to mark a lot of things congruent. Raise your hand if you have a question.
It's not about the list. I tried to go get some water.
Sure. All right. Now we're going to look at what it means to be a congruent triangle. So congruent triangles have the same shape and the same size. Here are examples of triangles that would not be congruent. They have different sizes or they have different shapes. So to be congruent, all the angles have to be congruent. All the sides have to be congruent.
Question.
All right, next we're going to look at what it means to be corresponding parts. So we'll have corresponding angles and corresponding sides. Corresponding angles are angles in separate triangles that match one another. We'll also look at corresponding sides. Those are sides in separate triangles that match one another. We'll talk about what it means when they match in a second. So when all of the corresponding angles are congruent, so when I say they match, if they're congruent, and all the sides are congruent, then we say that the two triangles are congruent. So if all the corresponding parts are congruent, you can say the triangles are congruent. So basically this chapter focuses on whether two triangles are the same shape and the same size, meaning that all the corresponding parts from one match with all the corresponding parts from the other. Example, so it says determine whether the angles or sides are corresponding angles, corresponding sides are neither. So if you're looking at angle A and angle M.
Corresponding angles.
Yes, they're both angles. If they match, if they're congruent, we call them corresponding angles. So number 3, those are corresponding angles.
What's the sign for corresponding? We gotta write it down.
Mm-hmm. All right, number 4, side AC, so marked with 2 tick marks. Side ML marked with 1. So would those be?
Neither.
No, they don't match, so they're neither. Angle B and angle N. Neither. One has one arc mark, one has three. So that would be a neither. BC and LN. Yes, they're both marked with 3. So that would be corresponding sides. Questions? So identifying corresponding triangles. Step 1. Start with the angles of the triangles. We're going to list the 3 angles, the 3 pairs of corresponding angles. Next, we're going to look at the sides of the triangle. We're going to list 3 pairs of corresponding sides. Order matters here. This is where the order really, really matters. So when we're writing a congruent statement, thank you. In a congruent statement, if it's not in the right order, you will get it completely wrong, okay? That's not really like a partial credit thing here. If the order is wrong, the whole answer is wrong. Okay, so we got to be really meticulous when we're writing these congruent statements, okay? So here it says list all corresponding congruent parts, then write a congruence statement. So I am going to start by listing all the corresponding angles. So I'm going to start with angle D.
Write that in the box.
Yes, yours has a little spot for the angles and the sides. Okay, so angle D matches with which one?
K.
Angle K. I'm just going to put angle D as congruent to angle K.
All this goes in
Okay.
the side? No, in the angle box?
Yeah, you will have 3 pairs of corresponding angles, 3 pairs of corresponding sides. So yes, you'll have 3 pairs in your angle box,
E and J.
3 pairs in the side box. Angle E goes with which one?
J.
Okay? And then the last pair,
I, F. If.
angle F is congruent to angle I. So if you trace the triangle, it's kind of like flip-flopped, right? This one, like 1, 2, 3 with the arc marks, 1, 2, 3. So you kind of have to flip this one to make it line up with this one. Everybody with me?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, when you're listing the sides, you want to sort of start with the angles that are congruent. So if I'm going to start with D and go to E, I need to start with K and go to J. That's what I mean with order matters, okay? So for the sides, I'm going to do D, E. So D, E, K, J. You can't say J, K.
It's just kidding.
Order matters, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I just said you can't say it and then I did it.
That's K.
So D, E, K, J. Sorry, someone said J, K and then that's what I
So
wrote.
that's conjunction.
Shh. You have to go with the corresponding parts, okay? So if you're starting at angle D and going to angle E, you have to start with K and go to J.
Like a square. E without the bottom.
Okay, so I'm going to go from the angle with 2 to the angle with 3 now. So EF
J.
would go to JI. Good.
You said EF will go to JI.
Okay, and then from 3 back to 1.
E to D. F
So
to D.
FD is going to be congruent to
I, J.
IK. Yep.
The AK much.
Okay, I'm going to explain it again. Do you see the sides with one tick mark?
Yes, ma'am.
They're corresponding.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay? But order matters. If you start at D, the angle marked with 1, and go to E, the angle marked with 2, you have to start with the angle over here to here. Okay? So I'm basically just lining up the sides. Order matters. Okay? So 1 tick mark and 1 tick mark. Those are the ones that are going to be corresponding congruent sides, but I have to write them in the same order. Then I go to 2 tick marks. So EF, I started with angle E, went to F, I have to start with J and go to I, okay? And then the sides with 3 tick marks written in the same order. Now you are writing the congruence statement. The congruence statement is where you say triangle blank 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 is congruent to triangle blank blank blank. Now, the first triangle, you get to pick the order. I usually go with the order that I did the angles. So DEF is how I'm going to write the first triangle. DEF. Triangle, you just draw a little triangle. That's the symbol for triangle. DEF is congruent to triangle. Which one lined up with D?
K.
K. Which one lined up with E?
That's my name.
And then F went with I. So order matters, okay? The ones with 1 tick mark went in the front. The angles with 2 tick marks went in the middle. The angles with 3 tick marks went in the back. So you can tell which parts are corresponding by this statement right here. The ones in the first position line up, the ones in the second position line up, the one in the third position line up. Questions?
Yeah. No.
Okay. Are we ready for the next one?
Yeah.
Okay. Number 8. Angles first. Let's go with the ones marked with 1. Angle B is congruent to angle G. Angle C is congruent to angle H. Angle D is congruent to angle I. Now this one's a little easier because it looks like you can just take this one and like tip it over and they line up. Nothing has to flip. The flip was kind of the hard part on the last one. All right, so now I'm going to do the sides. So I'm going to go BC would be congruent to what? GH. Good. All right, then I can go CD is congruent to HI. Perfect. And then the last set would be side DB would go with what? IG. Marked with 3. Yep.
CD.
3 and 3.
So here's how we're doing it. Let's get a side with the line of business.
Yeah, the sides are line segments, so you need the segment symbol above. All right, now the hardest part. The congruence statement. How do you want to write the first one? Triangle what?
Triangle
BCD is congruent to triangle GHI. Good. Now, the interesting thing about this is we could have done it in a lot of different ways, right? If you started with C, then went to D, then went to B, that's fine as long as your next one goes HIG. Do you know what I mean? So you might have a different answer than your neighbor, but you might still be right as long as your corresponding parts are in the same position. So like B and G are both first position, they're corresponding. C and H, second spot, corresponding. D and I, third spot, corresponding. Okay? Questions? All right. Now, the next one says, given triangle BDC is congruent to triangle MLK, list all the corresponding congruent parts. So, there's a few different ways we can approach this. I'm going to start by labeling the triangle, okay? So, B has to go with which one?
M.
B and M. So, I'm going to mark them in the same way. At the same time, I'm actually going to list those out. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Then which ones? L and D, because they're both second spot, right?
Yes.
So D has to be congruent to L.
Oh, that's gonna be hard.
All right, and then finally, C is going to have to match up with which one? K, because they're both in the third spot.
Yes.
Good. So those are the angles. Now, the sides, you can do a similar thing. You can go to the diagram now since it's labeled with the angles and go from like first angle to second angle, first angle to second angle. Or you can go back to this congruence statement up here. Okay? What are the first two letters in our first triangle? BD. That's going to have to line up with what? ML, because those are the first two letters back here. Okay? What are the second and third letters in the first one? D, C, and the second two letters in the next one? LK. I honestly think it's easier to go from here than from the diagram, but it's completely up to you.
If you think it's easy, it's easy. It's mine.
Thank you. All right, then I'm going to go last to first. So CB, KM. CB, I just went first to last. First to last. I like to do it with that because like this one ended in D, this one started in D, this one ended in C, it started in C. If you go like first last like BC, that's fine as long as you do MK. So as long as you write them the same way, you're good. And we don't have to write the congruent statement here because it's already there. And you can go through and label those sides too if you want as you're doing it. Like this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But this is the important part, okay? Questions? I believe we have 2 more for today.
Yep.
And we'll call it a day. We'll work on the homework. We'll start where we left off tomorrow.
Yeah.
All right. Number 10. We are given that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. So if you want, before you even read this, you could mark the parts that are congruent. So like one or A and D, you can mark them the same, B and E, and so on. Okay? Now, we're given 2 things that we're supposed to find. The length of DF and the measure of angle B. All right, so I'm going to find DF here. DF is the first letter and the third letter in the second triangle. So it should be the same as the first letter and the third letter of this triangle. So what side would that be?
4.
AC, which is, you are right, 4. So the length of DF is 4. You're just trying to find which side it matches with. Okay? So since it's the first and the third, it's going to match with the first and the third. Angle B. B is the middle. The middle letter in the congruence statement. So it should match with the middle angle in the second congruence, or the second triangle in the congruence statement. So angle E has a 40-degree measure. Angle B should match.
Yeah. So what's that? 40?
So again, you're just kind of lining it up with the information you're already given.
This is so funny, man.
Questions? All right. Last one. All right, number 11. Same idea. Now we are trying to find the length of BC and the measure of angle D. So check out the congruence statement. BC should line up with which one? EF. So find the length of EF.
10.
It is 10. So the length of BC should be 10.
Yeah. And then D is D.
All right, angle D, the first letter should match with angle A, but I don't know angle A. Very good. From last chapter, we learned 180 minus the two angles you're given will give you the one you're looking for.
43.
Perfect. What are your questions? Okay, the next one isn't in your notes, but I want to look at it, so just give me a second in case it appears on your homework, okay? Bear with me. So this says, determine whether the triangles are congruent. If so, write a congruent statement. So basically, you're trying to see if everybody has a partner, okay? So does CB have a corresponding part over here? Yeah. Okay. Does CD have a corresponding part? Yes. Does DB have a corresponding part? Yes. And do they each have a matching angle? So these two, so yeah, these are corresponding. You're just basically making sure all 6 parts match. All 3 of the segments match. All 3 of the angles match. And then you'd write that congruent statement just like we did. So angle B, C, D, triangle, same order. B goes with G, C goes with H, D goes with I. Okay? So beware of those as well. Any questions? Here comes the homework.